This is the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP, creator of No Nonsense Forex and author of the book No Nonsense Forex Trading Psychology. And with me, as he is every week, but this week with a new project he would like to share with you, it is Rob Reinhold.
Hello, everybody. This is Rob Reinhold, Maverick Trading and Maverick Currencies. And I'm actually really excited to share this with you because this is something I've been wanting to do for years. Look, I've been very busy the last 2 decades of my life. I started as a trader. I became the CEO of Maverick Trading. Now I'm the head trader there, and my life is very busy. And one of the things I always remembered hearing about, this was all the way back in the 1990s. I heard this story about 2 traders who had the belief that it doesn't matter how you picked a stock. All that mattered was how you managed it. The story goes that they hung up the Wall Street Journal pages of quotes up on the wall and they threw darts. Whatever stock the dart hit, they then flipped a coin, and heads they went long and tails they went short. And all they did was they instituted a position management strategy where they sold their losers, they held their winners, they picked 10 new stocks every single month. And they did this for 18 months in a row and never had a losing month. I have searched and scoured the internet for hours and hours and hours trying to find this story, this study, this report. And I can't find it. And I've been using this story to really teach people who join Maverick Trading about, hey, look, how important it is to have position management. And I've used the point that position management, to me, is way more important than how you get in. And this study would have shown with proof that the entry isn't the important part. It's the exit. Now, look, I'm not saying the entry is unimportant. The entry makes some trades really easy and some trades really hard. I'm not saying the entries don't matter. But what I'm saying is, with really good position management, you should be able to choose at random and actually make a profit at the end. Patrick, have you ever heard about anything like this before?
Briefly from you. I mean, you always had the quote saying you could pretty much flip coins, and if your money management and psychology are correct, then you're going to do just fine. But a put together study like this, no, this is the first time hearing of it.
Well, guess what? That's what I'm going to do. So I have created a YouTube channel called the Flat Earth Trading Society. Now, look, it's a funny name, and really what I'm trying to say is that, okay, and not to upset any flat earthers out there, but it's going to be difficult with the name I chose. Basically, I'm saying, let's throw out all of the books, all the science that says technical analysis and charting, meaning, hey, you should wait for a high base, you should wait for this or this. I'm saying, let's throw all that out and let's pick trades at random. Let's use random methods to pick trades, but institute very strict position sizing rules, very strict risk management rules, and very strict position sizing rules to where we cut our losers and we let winners run as far as we can. Now, look, we're going to be instituting the use of trailing stops, and we're going to be introducing trailing stops that follow a certain moving average. I'll break all that down, and we're going to apply the exact same position management to every single trade we take religiously. There is going to be no deviation. There is not going to be any time I decide to not follow the rules. It's going to be completely systematic trading. Now, this is where it's going to be really fun, Patrick. I've thought, how can you pick randomly? And I thought, you know what? Let's have some fun with it. I bought some props, and we're going to be using stuff like Ouija boards. We're going to be using stuff like star charts. We're going to be using stuff like D&D dice and Scrabble tiles. Basically, I want to make it as random as possible while having some fun. So for example, the Scrabble tiles. I'll literally just reach into a bag, and this is all going to be live on YouTube. So live on YouTube, so it's all legit. I'm just going to pull tiles out. Whatever stock symbol those tiles make, that's going to be the trade. Now, the one thing I am going to follow and adhere to, because we believe in this so much at Maverick, and I know you do too, Patrick, is trend. We will always be on the right side of a trend. That right there is going to put odds in our favor, regardless of any other charting that we can possibly use here. I'm going to make 10 trades every single month. And Maverick Trading has sponsored a $100,000 account that we're going to do this in. I'm going to show that account live all the time. And anytime we have a trade that is exited, I will be doing a short video. Okay, we exited this trade because of this reason, and we're going to log it into the journal. And we're going to do 10 new trades every single month. And look, and if you have some ideas of some creative ways to choose new trades, please send them to me. I want to make this as fun and as random as possible. But as I said, it's going to be very strict on the position management. So the channel is Flat Earth Trading Society. I'm the only one out there with this name, so you're going to be easy to find it. Please subscribe, follow along with this fun journey with me. We're going to have some fun times. I am going to start the trades on August 1st. So August 1st is going to be the date, but I will be making some videos and kind of going through some methodology up until that point before we actually start trading. So come along, come give me a follow on Flat Earth Trading Society, and let's see where this thing goes. I can't wait.
So I'll be honest, you gave me the elevator pitch on this a while back, and it was intriguing, but it also had an element of being completely ridiculous at the same time. The way you put it, though, I kind of get it now, and it's kind of gone from ridiculous to it's gone from ridiculous to quite intriguing. To where I'm going to have to check this out for sure, because this goes right alongside with all the things I believe in too. And you and I have spoken about this at length as well, but I've never really seen it in action. So you're putting your reputation here on the line too, Rob. This has to actually work, but I have pretty good faith that it will.
Oh, it could fail miserably. But look, we've talked about this in our podcast, Patrick. Remember when I said I love to fail? I would love to fail because look, I'll just make some adjustments and I'll do what I've done in trading for all the years I've been doing it. It'll work at one point.
No, yeah. If you just give it enough time, it's bound to work. Well, good. So we won't even need to put a link down below. Just look up Flat Earth Trading Society. It should pop up. If it's not, let us know in the comments, and we will provide a link next week. But we need to go ahead and get into the meat and potatoes of episode 32. And we've been talking in the last few episodes about different chemicals in our brain that are responsible for disrupting our overall trading psychology. And it's a little bit of a helpless feeling because you're like, well, we all have these chemicals in our brains at any given time. And it's a shame that they pop up at, sometimes random moments. And these are chemicals we can't necessarily control. They're just there. So the last few episodes, we spoke about how to manage these chemicals once you realize that they have entered your brain and they are starting to take over. Now, that's one thing, but ounce of prevention, pound of cure. This week, Rob, we're going to go over ways you can not maybe prevent these chemicals from coming about, but preventing them to rise to high enough levels to where they can really affect you. Is that a fair synopsis of what we're going over today?
That is perfect synopsis of what we're going over today. And as you said earlier, once the chemicals get too large, you start to lose free will. You start to lose the ability to make a rational decision in your prefrontal cortex. And so, yes, it's very, very important that we, first of all, understand this battle that's going on, not just in our brain, but in our bodies. This is a systemic issue that's just happening all over your body. And so let's start off with just kind of a holistic overall approach of, okay, you are a human being. You have these feelings. You have these chemicals swirling around. Let's start off with just an overall, daily life outlook of how to control these chemicals. Now, we talked about this in episode 3, I believed. And we talked about how hunger can greatly determine the decisions you make. And I shared with you a study about judges who gave out the harshest sentences before lunch. And they followed these judges for years, and they found out that from 11 to 12, they gave out the harshest sentences. So we talked about when you sit down and trade, are you sitting down in the right, not just frame of mind, but the right frame of body? Are you well rested? Did you stay up the night before? Did you have a little bit too much to drink last night and you're a little hungover? We need to approach every day in trading that our body is like an athlete going into a high intensity event where their body has to be optimum and ready to go. So as a trader, we have to go through this Same process, and make sure that our body is ready to go, that we have all the right balance of chemicals. We talked about meditation. We talked about exercise. We talked about sleep. We talked about nutrition, eating well. So this is more just like an overall life guideline to make sure your body is ready to go when it sits down and you have clarity of thought, you have clarity of what you need to do. And so we've talked about those things. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is from, lots of people, any of you who have followed Wim Hof has some methods that will help people out. Andrew Huberman talks about some of these methods. One of them is a cold plunge. Now, I started doing cold plunging about a year ago, and all it is you put yourself in really cold water, cold, icy water. And what it does, it spikes dopamine. And then when dopamine comes down, you get this kind of relaxed feeling that lasts for a long time. And your dopamine levels stay pretty high. Now, let's talk about that in trading. I'm not saying you need to take a cold ice bath before you make a trade. That's a little ridiculous. But let's talk about what the whole concept is here. You are going to have spikes in chemicals all throughout the day. Wouldn't you like to control those? Wouldn't you like to be in the driver's seat of when you have those spikes? And here's the thing, your body is just like a sprinter. If you just sprinted 100 yards, at the end of it, you're tired. You can't sprint anymore. Your endocrine system is the same way. If you control your spikes, if you do a hard exercise, you come home and you do a cold plunge and you do some of the breathing exercises that Wim Hof does, all of a sudden, you've taken your entire nervous system and just says, hey, you can just be mellow here. And you can go into the new situations much more calmly, much less likely to have the spikes because your body's a little exhausted and tired. Anything you want to add on that, Patrick?
Not really. I just think that's a good segue because as few people out there who are actually going to go this route, this is the most extreme route. So it's a good illustration of what things like this actually do. Because I just know by looking at our outline that the ideas we're going to bring to you after this are going to be a lot less extreme, but in a sense accomplish the same thing, just not to those extreme peaks and valleys.
I think that was a great thing you said. And when you were saying it, I realized this is a big extrovert talking. So let's kind of split this up into two categories. Extroverts like me, high energy people. I've said this in one of the episodes, I'll say it again. A tired extrovert is a good extrovert. For introverts, I think you don't need this stuff. An introvert would be more like meditation, more like some rituals that they go through to just find calmness. And frankly, I think an introvert that tried to do all this extreme stuff would probably end up having a worse experience after it. I mean, Patrick, I know you're more of an I than an E. What do you think introverts like you could do in order to get this calm, peaceful feeling?
I think it's more of a long-term approach. I don't think it's that one, let's do something crazy and spike our levels up so they also come down really quick too. That's never really been my MO as far as anything goes. Mine has always been more prolonged to where I'll do something and I might not see any effects from it for weeks. But over time, I definitely notice a difference. So just changes in diet are a really big one. Changes in sleep. Now, if you get up at 10 o'clock in the morning and say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to start getting up at 7, that's not going to work. You have to go gradual. So that's always been the way I do it. When it comes to exercise, you're not going to go in and just crank out a 45-minute full body workout. That's a terrible way to go. To go from nothing to that, you got to go slow. So I make changes, but I make them very slowly. And I understand that I'm not going to see immediate impacts, and that's not going to be, the best feeling in the world. But I know what the end result's going to be because it's the same end result every time. And the only time I don't feel them is when I start slipping on my exercise, my sleep, and my nutrition. So that would be the way I would approach it. It's not the most exciting way, but it's effective all the same.
I think that is very good advice for introverts. And the last thing I wanted to cover is kind of this holistic overall approach is the use of stimulants. Now look, I'm not talking about meth. If you're using meth and trading, you need to stop both. You actually need to stop both and get some help. But look, let's talk about stimulants like coffee. So caffeine, if you do any studies on caffeine, it's fascinating. Caffeine is actually quite good for human beings if used in the right way at the right time. However, I read a study, I'll share a link with you down below in the YouTube video, about the effects of stimulants on extroverts versus introverts. So stimulants, when extroverts take stimulants like caffeine, they usually have improvement in abilities, improvement in scores, improvement in everything. However, when you give them to an introvert, introverts can actually have lower scores because of it. They can have lower cognitive abilities. So stimulants is one thing. Again, if you are putting those into your body, understand there is a reaction that you're getting. And I want you to be very careful and conscious of, are you getting the right reaction from the stimulant you're putting into your body? If you are an introvert and when you drink a bunch of coffee, you get jittery, it's not for you.
So let the introvert chime in here and talk about stimulants. If you need a solution here, if you might be struggling with things like this, here's what I can say and what I've figured out over time for myself at least. So I really don't like coffee. I know that's strange to most people, but I don't. So what I've always taken has been things like Red Bull and 5-Hour Energy. Now, you can't get 5-Hour Energy in any country not named the United States of America. I think there's red dye 40 in it or something that other countries won't have. So as disturbing as that may be, I still, every time I go to the States, I get a bunch and I bring it back. And so I'm actually about to run out. So I'm going to switch to Red Bull. But when I do, here's what I do. I only take half of a 5-Hour Energy, and I only drink half of a sugar-free Red Bull. And then I put cellophane over the top and put it in the fridge and drink the other half the next day. This has worked for me because, like you said, Rob, not only not having any caffeine, I get really stuck in the mud. It's not so much cognitive function and clarity of thought. It's more just like I don't want to do anything. But if I overdo it, and you have seen me firsthand on that in the podcast, I cannot think straight. I cannot formulate a thought without going in 100 different directions. I'm kind of like that already, but if I have what is considered a normal amount of liquid stimulation, then I'm even more of a mess than I am normally. So I've found kind of that happy medium to where I still drink caffeine, but I drink far less than most people. And over time, that has really, really worked for me. I'm not sure if anybody else can speak to that. But it took me a long time to figure that out, longer than I really wanted to.
Well, I love that story because everything here is very personal. How you handle caffeine and stimulants is going to be wildly different than everyone else. And that's what we're really trying to share with everyone here, is that we don't know what's going to work for you. You don't really know what's going to work for you unless you're consciously thinking about it. So I'm going to go back to Andrew Huberman. One of the things that he recommends, he has a whole morning routine for people. I highly recommend to go watch that if you want to. He talks about getting bright light in your eyes as early as possible. So when you wake up, he says, go for a walk outside to get that bright light. And he goes through all the science behind what it does for the body. He actually recommends that you don't take stimulants right when you wake up. You take them about an hour and a half after waking up. I've started doing that. I haven't noticed any difference, so I'm going to go back to how I was doing it before. But this is where, again, experiment and see what gets you to the point where you feel that you have the optimum amount of performance and the optimum amount of cognitive ability. Figure that out. Do a little bit of experimentation. Be safe. Pay attention to how you feel and how you work, and then make your decisions off of that. So I want to kind of wrap up that whole part with like, okay, this is something you just do every day. You figure out, how do you get into your optimum space to where you are fully in control of all the chemicals going on in your body. Now let's talk about, you've done all that. You're in the optimum state of mind, and you still are going to go out there and get stimulus, because that's what happens in life. You get stimulus. And every time that stimulus hits, there's going to be a release of chemicals. So we also have to be thinking about that. And we have to be very conscious about this. Now, I'm going to bring in an example, an analogy, because I think this is the best one I can think of, is in Alcoholics Anonymous. People who are trying to get off of alcohol and drink less or not drink at all. One of the things they talk about in the steps is to avoid triggers. So things like avoiding your favorite bar. So let's say you have a favorite bar that you used to go to, and it's on your way home from work. At AA, they say you need to find a new way home from work to where you don't see it. And so a lot of this is going to be about avoiding triggers. So if you know that there's a big report coming out on, let's say the Bank of England is coming out, and you know that you don't react well to those situations, you want to make sure you're not around. You want to make sure you don't get that stimulus. And I think I've told this story before, Patrick. I'll tell it again. I used to always love to have the news on. I like to trade news announcements. I've always liked to do them, and I've always done fairly well at them. And years ago, I was up in Canada, and they didn't have CNBC on, and I always had CNBC on because the news would come out, and they'd tell you right away what the news was, and then I could then think about it and process it and then make my trade off of it. And up in Canada, they didn't have it, so I didn't have any TV. I didn't have any stimulus. All I had was the chart. I made the trade, made some good money, shut down my laptop, and went about my day, and realized at the end of the day, oh, I don't even know what the news was. And I recognized I was a better trader without that stimulus. So I want you to be very, very conscious about the stimulus you're bringing into your body. I want to also talk about negative stimulus. Now, we all know out there online, they did studies, and negative information circulates about 7 times faster than positive information. There are websites that really cater to negative information. Look, I'm just going to name one. Hopefully this doesn't get anyone in trouble, but it's one of my favorite websites. I love Seeking Alpha. I love Seeking Alpha, but Seeking Alpha is almost always negative. They're always putting out the sky is falling, negative things, and it always gets more traction on the negative side. The more I listen to that, it changes how I feel, and then it changes my behavior in trading. So be very conscious about the stimulus you're taking into your body. Patrick, do you have any help for people about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I see you're seeking alpha, and I raise you zero hedge. My God, if there's ever a sky is falling financial news organization, that is it. And you can't escape them. They're all over Twitter. And on that note, Twitter can be very detrimental as well. You got to be very careful who you follow, because there's people out there whose entire business is selling you a crypto product or a gold product. So that also means their entire business is telling you that everything else is going down the drain. Now, I'm actually in that camp, but I have to be as neutral as I can and try to see both sides, because there's always both sides. I don't have a product like that to sell you. So I'm more interested in giving you as much of the filtered truth as I can. But that always affects me though too, because the majority of my financial Twitter typically brings up negativity. And I'm on Twitter a lot. So this is something I really need to be aware of, because it's so easy to drift off into those little rabbit holes and those what I would call them extremist comfort zones, because all of us kind of think a certain way already. And if we just get a little bit of a push, it can lead us really into the wrong direction. And then that whole confirmation bias, like we talked about long ago, just consumes us over time. These brain chemicals don't even matter anymore because we're already too far gone.
I think that is great advice. And it's something you have to look at both ways. You know, you have the permabulls on CNBC that are coming up and just always cheerleaders and always saying it's all great. That's a lie too. They have a financial reason to tell you that. So again, limit your sources. Understand if you want to watch them for entertainment, that's great. That's great. But just understand that every bit of stimulus you allow into your eyes and ears, there potentially could be a chemical reaction to that stimulus. So be very cautious when you go out there.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And places like CNBC and you missed out on the wonders of BNN, the Canadian version. It's the same with CNBC too, because you have to understand they have sponsors. Their sponsors are financial products that do well in a bull market. You can't foment a bear market and still have those sponsors. It just doesn't work. So if you understand the intention of why these things happen, then it's a little easier to not fall into these echo chambers over time.
Good advice again. So true. So be cautious about the stimulus you allow in. All right. So we talked about the holistic approach, the overall approach of approaching trading with the correct brain chemicals. Understanding that there's going to be arrows shot at you throughout the whole time. And you got to be very conscious of those arrows so you don't get any spikes in those. Let's talk about results. We've had several episodes on how bad the results of a singular trade are going to create a cascading effect in your body. We talked about dealing with slumps. We talked about having a bad month or a year. We've talked about it so many times that this is really the recurring theme of this podcast is your trades that you just made. Don't let them have effect on your next trade. So let's spend a little bit of time going over this again. We've already covered this several times, but this is just, as I said, this is what this podcast is about. You make these trades, you have these results. These results are going to have an actual effect on your mind and body and creating chemicals that are swirling around that are going to undermine your future success. That is the Trading Psychology Podcast in a nutshell. How do you avoid that? And we've talked about one of my favorite episodes we've done, Patrick, is systems over goals. And I know this is like you're saying, and I love it, and I'm going to steal it from you, but system over goals. How can people get the right chemical payback following systems over goals?
Well, it's easy. Like we said in that episode, you fall in love with the process. Just like we have spoken about today with ways you can prevent these brain chemicals from taking over, is get into a routine, not just a routine, but a routine that has all of these things involved, like exercise, like proper sleep, proper nutrition, meditation, if it applies, managing stimulants, managing your time. And then everything else just seems to fall into place. I'm sure we've all met people who follow strict regimens like this, and we've all met people who absolutely don't. And there is a marked difference in the way those people speak, act, their hand gestures, the things they care about, everything. And you just know right away, one guy's going to make it, one guy has no chance. So you just have to decide, which one of those people do you want to be? Well, you need to start acting like the one that you admire or the one that seems to have it together, because we've also said before too, the margin of success is so small in this industry. You can't afford not to take every step possible, even if it means ice baths, to get to where you need to get to that guy who's got it all together, who loves his routine or her routine and uses it to produce top-end results. All these people are the same. A couple of them, historically may have had vices and things like that they fall into after the work is done. But when it's go time, it's go time. And I've always thought, I'm no good with vices. If I fall into one, I fall into one forever. That's why I don't really have any anymore. I knew personally that I had to become a version of that person if I was ever going to get out of the lifestyle I was in. And I did. And something weird happened is I ended up absolutely loving the routine and the process. So much more than the actual results. I don't even spend the money I make. I just wake up every day so excited to attack the steps I have on my whiteboard and on my notebook and knocking them out, because I know that just brings me one step closer to where I ultimately want to be. So if you guys can get there too, that's my one big advice to you for this episode, because all of the things we talk about today and what we talked about in that episode with systems over goals, that's the end game. It's just a matter of getting there. You don't have to get there right away. Sometimes it's too much. Get there little by little, but just make sure you get there.
In that episode, we talked about reframing success from not about the money, but about the process. Stuff like, I'm going to diligently journal for 5 days this week. Look, that's not a big goal. That's not a tough goal. I have a hard time with it because I hate journaling. But when you do that, you all of a sudden see that you have full control over that completion. But if you say stuff like, I'm going to make 200 pips this week, you don't have control over that. And so then when you don't meet that goal, then you get the negative chemicals that go in your brain and undermine you for the next thing. Make the system the focus and make that the goals you're trying to meet, because you have control over those. So again, system over goals, reframe success to be about the system, not about the result.
And we've talked about that very example before, but I love when you bring it up because it just makes me smile, because there's still so many videos on YouTube out there on the Forex side and the crypto side that say, well, on the Forex side, they would say something to the effect of, make 200 pips a week with this strategy. And it's if you know anything about trading, and if you've been in this game for more than 3 months, like, you know just how ridiculous that is. But I couldn't imagine anybody entering the game with a goal like that, as opposed to managing the things you can control. I was like you too, Rob, even though I'm introverted. I hated journaling. I still hate it. I barely do it now because I've just been at this for so long. But when I was really, my first 6, 7, 8 years, I knew I had to, but I didn't want to. Do you know why? Because on that comment section that we talk about that's so important, I would have to type out what I did wrong. What stupid thing did I do to screw up a perfectly good trade? And I've never liked to admit when I do something stupid. It's so funny, like, now that I'm older and I'm kind of past all that, now I don't mind. I'm totally fine with looking stupid and making mistakes. I do it all the time, even on social media. But back then, I was just so arrogant. I thought I had this game mastered. Even the results totally didn't show that. But that comment section prevented me from wanting to journal. I had to force myself to do it because it was the only way I understood that mathematically I was going to reduce that number of losses. And thank God I did. I'm not even sure how I did it, but I just mentally forced myself to do it. And look, there's a lot of you out there that are going to have to do the same thing when it comes to sleep schedules or nutrition or exercise or something like that. But understand, it's non-negotiable. I don't know any professional traders who are super obese. I don't know any that get 4 hours of sleep a night. It's just they all seem to have these certain things in common. So if you get, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. The lack of brain chemicals getting in their way probably contribute a lot to this, apart from the overall discipline of having to go this route.
We've been going on and on about all these chemicals. And look, as human beings, we're going to have them. And this whole episode has been about avoiding them, making sure you don't get them. All right, let's end this podcast episode with a pro hack. And we talked a little bit about this in our episode on dopamine. Dopamine is the reward drug of the brain, and it reinforces behaviors to where it's more likely you're going to continue that same behavior. We talked a little bit about this, so let's really focus on this pro level tip of how to take these chemicals and use them for good. So we just talked about systems over goals. We want you to reward yourself when you meet that system. When you get to that 5 days of journaling that you hated, we want you to then tie a reward onto that. So let's say that you have a favorite movie that you want to go to. You're going to say, okay, if I journal all 5 days this week, I get to go to this movie on Friday night. Do you see how all of a sudden you're tying that dopamine reward to the behavior, not to the results, not to, hey, I need to make $500 this week. Again, that's stupid, because if you don't make it, then all of a sudden you don't get the dopamine hit and you get the negative feedback loop of those effects. So make it to something you can control. Tie a dopamine reward to it at the end. What I'm telling you is you are going to have an easier time next week. And then next week you say, okay, well, if I do 5 days all this week, on the weekend I get to crack open my favorite beers and have a party. Use that. It's a pro tip move to help solidify the behavior you want.
I think this is great advice because what you're doing is you're replacing the negative dopamine hit you would get by having a slice of pizza because you were bored, or taking a nap because you felt like you were out of energy, and you're replacing it with something that rewards you for doing all the things you don't want to do. Let that be journaling. If you fully journaled every day, every trading day this week, and you were completely honest with yourself, reward yourself, like Rob said, with something like that. There's a reason why I always say you need to train people like you train dogs, because you can do this with dogs too. So if you change the reason why you give a dog a reward, then that dog's behavior will change because it wants that treat or whatever you're giving it. You can do the same with yourself. Instead of having these negative dopamine hits, you can switch that to positive. That's really powerful, Rob.
Well, the first thing that jumped into my mind was Pavlov's dogs. And I saw a tweet years ago that it almost blew my mind up. It said, "Do you think that Pavlov thinks about feeding his dogs every time he hears a bell?" I can't stop thinking about that now. All right, so let's wrap this up here. All these body chemicals are going to happen. Get yourself in the state of, I'm going to use the term flow, to where hey, you've got everything settled down. Patrick, you went through all the stuff. Everything's settled. You've got these arrows coming at you every day, these news sources, this TV, all these things coming at you that you've got to manage. And then your focus has to be on the system, not on the results, because the results will come from you following the system. And if you're having a hard time doing all the system, use these body chemicals. Use the chemicals to help you meet these short-term systems goals that you have. Give yourself rewards all the time. Tie rewards to it. Make things that really are meaningful to you, that you like. So when you experience that pleasure, that dopamine hits, it's a reward for you not moving a stop this week. That's going to help you next week. So use these chemicals for your own trading good. Use them in your entire life to build the behaviors you want to, because once you reinforce them, it becomes programming to where you no longer need to think about them. And that is where you have competence, or the term unconsciously competent. That's where that comes from.
And I'll just close with saying, alluding to what I was saying before, you have to be honest with yourself. I talked long ago about backtesting by hand and how you can't come to a losing trade that your system would have given you and sit there and say, "Oh, I wouldn't have taken that trade." Yeah, you would have. You would have absolutely taken that trade if your system told you to. And it's funny, when I said that, a lot of people in the comments section echoed what I was saying, and they said, "Yeah, I have a tendency to do that." And I was like, well, then you're screwing up your entire results if you do that. So putting this into play is one thing, but making sure you're completely honest with yourself, that's actually harder than it looks. But keep at it, because again, the payoff, as we've pretty much illustrated this episode and other episodes, is 100% worth it.
Well, it becomes easier and easier when you start to see the behavior that you want actually change. It's much easier to be honest with yourself when you see yourself becoming the person you want to be. That's when it's powerful.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to episode 32 of the Trading Psychology Podcast. We will see you again next week. Thanks for joining.
Goodbye, everybody. And go check out Flat Earth Trading Society. It's about to get wild.